expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbour as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbour?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and took off, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while travelling, came upon him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, treating them with oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and then I come back and will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise."
Thank you, Fraser. That's a pretty well-known story. The Good Samaritan, as it's otherwise known. And in the Good Samaritan, for those of you who maybe don't come to church very often, or don't know the Bible, the significance of this man who is thought to be a Jewish traveller, has come down the road and has been robbed and beaten and left by the side of the road. And while he's laid there, the priest comes along, and the priest is a Levite. So there's a significance here that there's 2 Levites basically who come past, and they do nothing. One of which is a priest, so he's very much in power, if you like, and one of which is just a Levite, as the story goes. And then the last person who comes along is a Samaritan. So for those of you who don't know their ancient history, Levites and Samaritans are 2 completely different sets of people, different cultures, different religions. It's a bit like saying there was a banana who was squashed on the side of the road, and then a banana came along and said, and just carried on walking. And then another banana came along and went, and just kept on walking. And then an orange came along and went, "Oh no, look at that poor banana. I'm going to go and help them." It's the difference. That's how different it is. It's not apples and oranges, it's bananas and oranges. That's how different Levites and Samaritans are, just to put it into some kind of simple context for everyone. I did think about bringing fruit and drawing faces on them, but I didn't have time, so I didn't. So it's really important in this story, what Jesus is saying is that it's not the people who you would expect from the same religion, from the same culture, from the same family, who are helping their own person in need. It's not that person. It's the person who's come from the other side of the railway track. It's the person who's come from the other culture, from the other religion. They're the ones that are actually stopping and helping. And when you think about that, that's really, really important, because we're not talking about just a Good Samaritan. Quite often we think of a Good Samaritan being someone who's doing just a really nice thing. Oh, they're a Good Samaritan. They picked up that person's bags when they dropped them and took them with them. No, this is somebody who wouldn't be expected to pick up those bags, has picked up those bags. That's the difference. Yesterday, I went to a veteran space with my wife to watch the Wimbledon. And when we were talking in there, we were talking about this. It's a beautiful space, and it's really, really large, and it's very kind of traditional pub type place, but exclusively for veterans or members. And when I was speaking to, it's the first time we'd been there, and when I was speaking to one of the committee members, they talked to me about how they're the first woman committee member ever. And this place has been open for over 100 years. 109 years? 115 years this place has been open for. And up until 8 years ago, women weren't allowed in the building. Because it was an old boys club. Because obviously veterans are middle-aged, old white men. That's who, that when you think of a veteran, a lot of people think of that kind of image. And we know that it's not. We know that veterans are not people who just fought in the First World War and the Second World War. It's people who have served the country and have tried to help stabilise other places or this country. But it got me thinking about how we have these spaces, and we have exclusive spaces, and we have inclusive spaces. And there's a difference, isn't there, between an exclusive space and an inclusive space. And I don't mean exclusive as in excluding people. I mean exclusive as in you've got to be part of the club to be there. And I also thought about how archaic it was that only 8 years ago they allowed women into the building. There is a danger, I think, when we talk about inclusive spaces, but how we then create a space that is safe and inclusive. So how do you create a space that doesn't exclude anyone, isn't exclusive because you need to be some kind of member to be there, but is safe for the people who are there? And when we think about recently, there are a few countries, a lot of countries around the world, but there are a few countries recently who are neighbours, who have different cultures, different religions, who are at war for one reason or another, where one part thinks they're right and the other one thinks they're right, and then they're at it and killing people in order to get what they want. And sometimes I actually think that maybe they don't know what they want. That sometimes I think things go on for such a long time that people have forgotten what happened in the very beginning. And people have forgotten about the Levites and the Samaritans, and seeing the poor Jewish traveller on the side of the road, and people not going to help. It took an orange to help a banana in order for something to happen. I think it's very difficult when you're trying to create a safe space, particularly if it's connected to gender or sexuality. If it's gender, it's difficult because if you create a men's club, because men need their space to talk about male things, I think, women might need a women's space to talk about women's things. So is there a non-binary space for people to talk about non-binary things, or an intersex space to talk about intersex things? And when you talk about male spaces and female spaces and non-binary spaces, where do the trans people fit into all of that? Where they want to fit in, who they want to be, or because somebody's going to put them in a box? And this is where we start to become exclusive. Because as soon as you start putting a box around a space, you're making it exclusive, because you're saying that it's only for certain people. At the gathering, we really try and create an inclusive space. Yes, we are primarily here for LGBTQ plus Christians and allies, but faith. Would we say, oh no, sorry, this is just for Christians? No, we wouldn't. So just because the label says something doesn't necessarily mean that another person can't come in. So when Jesus says, which one of these people would more help to the other one, whatever the wording was. It talks about, he says, which one of these do you think helped more than the other? And he says, well, the one who stopped and helped. And he says, then you do likewise, go and do likewise. So in other words, go and help, not just the people who you would expect to help, but help the people who you wouldn't be expected to help. And that becomes then very difficult, because sometimes when you try and help somebody you wouldn't be expected to help, they're a bit cynical, or they're a bit doubtful as to what your intentions are. Did the Good Samaritan, was the intention of the Good Samaritan to get something out of the Jewish traveller? Or was their intention purely to pick them up, take them somewhere, and get them some help? He even paid for somebody to look after this Jewish traveller, to make sure that he was looked after properly. So not only is he giving his time, he's also giving his money, which somebody who is better versed in ancient money will be able to tell me how much 2 denarii is. But it's not a small amount, you know, because it's asking somebody to look after them. I like the idea, I sort of like this artwork in a way, and only because that's not a man, a Jewish traveller who's been beaten up. That's somebody who looks like they're starving and absolutely on their knees. And I just wondered how long in the story of the Good Samaritan this person has been there for, and how many other people have walked past and not done anything. But I also like the fact that there's a donkey in the background, because in the story he says he picks him up and he puts him on his own donkey. And I think that is also important. One of the reasons that the priest and the Levite might not have wanted to help was because they would have thought that the Jewish traveller was sort of ritually unclean, and they wouldn't have wanted to touch and get themselves dirty. But I think when you're helping a stranger, you should expect to get dirty, because you don't know who you're helping, and if you're not willing to put yourselves out a little bit, then I don't think you should be putting yourselves out. There's a few songs that talk about who our neighbours are and how we serve them. There's some very famous ones, certainly in the tradition that I come from, so United Reformed Church. But one of them is Jesu, Jesu. So it goes, Jesu, Jesu, fill us with your love. Show us how to serve the neighbours we have from you. Kneels at the feet of his friends, silently washes their feet. Master who pours out himself for them. Neighbours are rich folk and poor, varied in colour and race. Neighbours are near and far away. These are the ones we should serve. These are the ones we should love. All these are neighbours to us and you. I think the sentence in there that strikes to me is the neighbours are rich folk and poor, varied in colour and race. Neighbours are nearby and far away. I think often when we talk about neighbours, we're literally talking about the person who lives next door. Oh, who's your neighbour? Oh, well, it's a lovely old lady, and she shouts because she's a bit deaf. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about neighbours being everybody. Everybody is our neighbour. And yes, I did think about putting in the Neighbours theme tune, as we've probably rightly guessed, but I decided not to. There's another hymn. Who knew that hymn, by the way? Jesu, Jesu. I knew Del would know it. Jesu, Jesu, fill us with your love. Show us how to serve the neighbours we have in you. No? No? Okay, good. The other one I wanted to look at was when I needed a neighbour, were you there? Were you there? There's more nods about this one.
Had it in church this morning.
Had it in church this morning, there we go. So, the kind of the refrain, when I needed a neighbour, were you there? Were you there? When I needed a neighbour, were you there? And the creed and the colour and the name won't matter. Were you there? And it goes on, I was hungry and thirsty, were you there? I was cold, I was naked, were you there? When I needed shelter, were you there? When I needed a healer, were you there? And then the last line, wherever you travel, I'll be there, I'll be there. And all of these hymns are speaking the same thing, is when you need somebody, no matter who they are, no matter what walk of life they come from, you should be there as a neighbour, as a friend, to help someone. There's a great hymn by a man called Fred Calm. I don't know if anybody knows Fred Calm, but he was I want to say American Presbyterian, but he could have been a Canadian Presbyterian. Sorry, anybody online, I've got that wrong. But his hymn that he wrote, I want to read almost as a reflection for you to listen to and think about the words that I'm using. Help us accept each other as Christ accepted us. Teach us as sister, brother, each person to embrace. Be present, Lord, among us and bring us to believe we are ourselves accepted and meant to love and live. Teach us, O Lord, your lessons, as in our daily life we struggle to be human and search for hope and faith. Teach us to care for people, for all, not just for some, to love them as we find them or as they may become. Let your acceptance change us so that we may be moved in living situations to do the truth in love, to practice your acceptance until we know by heart the table of forgiveness and laughter's healing art. Lord, for today's encounters with all who are in need, who hunger for acceptance, for justice, and for bread, we need new eyes for seeing, new hands for holding on. Renew us with your Spirit. Lord, free us, make us one. The questions that we have today are not intended to be easy, as mine never are, but I want us to discuss about how we can be better neighbours, and that's in the generalised sense that we're talking about and not in the next door neighbour type thing. And then how to create spaces that are inclusive but safe. How do you make sure that everybody is included, but for those people that are there, it is safe for them to belong? And the last question is, how can we encourage others to be better neighbours and strive for a world in which every human being is truly equal? If you have the answer to the last one, I'd be grateful to receive it, thank you. I actually think we might just stay as one group, because there are a few people who are actually still out in the kitchen, so maybe we'll be two groups. Maybe we'll have one group in here and one group in the kitchen to discuss these questions. Before those of you who are online leave us, I hope that you can maybe discuss this with somebody that you know, or even write something in the WhatsApp group or the chat that we need to. But we'll have a short prayer before we leave you. Holy One, teach us, help us to become better neighbours, to be the Good Samaritan, to be that orange. May we enable our strengths. May you enable our weaknesses. May you help us to become the people that we are meant to be and to strive for a world where everyone is truly equal. We ask this in your name. Amen. Cheerio, people online. I'll see you next week.